Hey everybody, Preston Poulter here with Pocket Jacks Comics. Been observing a lot of interesting things going on in the industry lately. Comics is going under an absolute revolution when it comes to distribution, just as the board game industry is, and it's caused by the similar technology of crowdfunding. In the age of the internet, it's easy to put out and establish a culture around a central character, a comic figure, and market that to an audience, just as Richard C. Meyer is doing with Jawbreakers, just as Ethan Van Sciver is doing with Cyberfrog. Artist meets patron, and the world becomes a better place. That's a fantastic market, and everybody should be chasing that. But they're not. At least, the big companies aren't. In this way, comic books is very similar to the movie industry. The movie industry is dominated by, the big six studios, and they put out their content, and they have a monopoly on cinema screens. So the idea that you or I could put together a movie and compete with them is something that's very silly, except we can in a different distribution channel, in the straight-to-video channels. You and I can make fairly cheap movies, somewhere in the $100,000 to $250,000 range, and distribute our own movies on Netflix or iTunes, and drive people to that traffic using merchandising. So the idea that you can put together your own intellectual property has suddenly become available to basically anybody off the street. This is a revolution in distribution technologies. So as different distribution technologies start to disrupt each other, in this case, as the Indiegogo kickstarting model of crowdfunding a comic book and cutting out the middleman shows efficiency and shows results, then the big companies will have to decide whether they want to embrace it, which is never. Then big companies never embrace a new technology, or instead try and drive it under. What we're witnessing is, with all the SJW nonsense, is an attempt to label all who oppose them as racist, bigots, homophobes, and whatnot. If you look back in the history of art, people have always engaged in this when a new entertainment technology came along. When cinema first came out, the stage was still the prestigious acting gigs, and they viewed the new technology and the actresses who worked there as lesser than. And then radio, and then comic books, and now Kickstarter. Yeah, every time there's a revolution in the entertainment technology and the way it distributes to customers, the old artistic guard will look down on the new. So essentially, is it some crazy coincidence that largely the Comicsgate, anti-Comicsgate argument largely comes down to the major industry titans and the small indie startups? Is that purely coincidence? Do you not realizing you're taking part in a revolution of technology and that you're merely the first responders? Here's how it's going to work. You're going to have, essentially, comic vending machines. A return to the newsstand, that's all it is. Except they're going to be profitable enough that you can actually man them with just a person, an artist, a comic creator. A local distributor can take Alterna Comics or any other indie comic creators, stock a kiosk, sell that in prints, and make out just fine. It's a return to a prior business model of distribution of the newsstand. Where did the newsstand go? There used to be around. It used to be a thing. It used to be a thing you'd see in movies is a newsstand. I mean, that's where Clark Kent kind of worked. But that seems kind of 40s-esque, really. But, I mean, I certainly saw newsstands in the 80s and then the 90s. But now we're observing a failure of the book business itself. Book retailers have just been crushed, and you don't see newsstands anymore. People are expected to get all their content online, but there's still a hunger for people for a news medium, something they can hold in their hands. We provide that answer. We return to this newsstand model, except instead of stocking Time magazine, which maybe people don't want to read, we have entertaining and well-illustrated stories. That's it. I want you to do an interesting thought experiment here with me, just for a minute. Let's say some individual, we'll say Ethan Van Sciver, just because he seems to be holding the record in terms of biggest so far, comes out and says, here's my comic book, and he can consistently, over and over again, put out hits. Just every time, boom, new comic book Kickstarter, $750,000. Boom, now it's $1 million. Like, if that guy was that big a rock star, or woman, don't mean to be too gender specific, then that person would have a company form around them, a new image kind of comics things. But that company, unlike all other comic book companies, would have a radically different distribution model that didn't even factor in Diamond. It was just factoring in, this is how I sell to customers. And one could become a bookstand or operate a bookstand profitably selling that company's content or a handful of companies' content. You're essentially on the vanguard if you're able to work directly from comic creator through the audience, through the magic of the internet. That's the new distribution model, and that's what we're witnessing right now. Now let me take you down another thought experiment, if you will. But this time I'm going to use some actual empirical data to factor into your decision. Let's say I inquired today with a local flea market that operates just a full-time warehouse where different people just rent different stalls or tables, and that flea market person said, I could pay $60 a week and have a table in his flea market, which would be open 4 days out of the week for, say, 8 to 10 hours a day. So if I was sitting there at that table with a bunch of comic books that people had never heard of, a bunch of indie comic books, but good indie comic books, like my indie comic books, and women walked by and I said, pardon me, ma'am, can I interest you in a story about the 2 deadliest lady fighter pilots in world history? And that woman's going to go, I don't normally like comic books, but what did you say that was about? And I'm able to sell a comic book to a new customer. Do you think I could do that? I've done it. Can you imagine doing that with just a variety of great, wonderful stories that are well illustrated? Well, that's all you need. It doesn't have to come from Marvel or DC. It can come from me or from any other creator, from Ethan Van Sciver or Richard C. Meyer. We can put together a table and fill it with stock that can be sold profitably, particularly when the cost of that table is only $60 or whatever your local flea market would charge. And let me tell you something. From doing so many comic shows, I can easily get a great return on pretty fat weekly income just selling my comics and my prints. And now that I'm there doing it every day, and it's local, there's no reason why I shouldn't be merchandising more with buttons and T-shirts and all these other fairly high profitable, good selling items. I can turn a fine income off of that. And I could further turn an even nicer income off of that if I was able to sell these same customers even more comics than I was able to personally produce. So, if Peter Simeti and I were able to work out an arrangement, for instance, I'd love to stock my little flea market kiosk with Alterna Comics, in addition to the stuff I'm selling. Or any other creator can contact me and go, well, how about this? I meet so many interesting people. I went to Tucson Comic-Con. A guy named Scott Vaughn. He'd done his own comic book by hand, wrote it, illustrated it, and everything. And it has a Flash Gordon field. He traded my comic with his comic, and I think I got a great deal because his is just a work of art. It's called Warbirds of Mars, the Golden Age, and it is like this old-style pulp Flash Gordon, and the plot line involves like aliens invade during the middle of World War II, and so the alien Nazi mutants, and so you're fighting this Flash Gordon-style stuff against alien Nazi mutants, and the artwork is gorgeous. And as I'm saying this, I could probably sell you the comic book if you were right in front of me, right? Despite the fact you'd never actually heard of it before. So I can stock my kiosk with all kind of things that turn me a profit. And if Marvel and DC want to offer me Batman to sell in my kiosk, I'll consider that too. But it's not necessary. This is a revolution in distribution, and it's going to be driven entirely based on merit. The people who generate the sales dictate the market. So yes, I guess I'm making an open offer to Peter Simeti, because I watched his video that I link you to in the description about the state of the comic book industry, and I was absolutely captivated. And with someone who has a lot of business experience and some entertainment experience, produced my own movie, I'm like, okay, I think I understand this entertainment business, the newly emerged entertainment business. It's direct to consumer. I appreciate you sharing it with me. I love your $1.50 price point. Let's talk business. And that's a discussion that I don't need to have with that many people in order for me to turn a profit. So I don't have to agree with everybody. So I don't have to label myself Comicsgate or anti-Comicsgate. I can just label myself me. And if I'm able to generate the sales with some friends, then awesome. Let's do it. I'm ready to talk.